So many people, myself included, argued that WWE should only have one World Championship. But if they did, how would the past 6 years look? Well, I think that's an interesting question. One that should be answered as the topic of this video. Because today... A big thank you to all of my wonderful Patreon supporters such as Inigo Montoya, Dakari Garment, and Rodney Harris. Thank all of you for the support, as it really does mean a lot. Alright, so for this video, obviously enough, we're entering the speculation station, as we're going to be presuming a lot of things. And as such, I'm also going to be working with a lot of backstage rumors and reports which may or may not be true. I figure if you're going to take guesses at stuff, you might as well just keep on doing it. Anyway, I'm going to be using these rumors to help me postulate on what might have happened if WWE only had one World Championship over the past several years ever since creating the Universal title. But I can't stress this enough. As obvious as it might be, I clearly don't know what really would have happened, and I'm willing to bet neither can you, unless you can see into other timelines. So this is just my best attempt at it. But what do you think will happen? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're at it, don't be stuck wondering, what if there's new content on Dave Knows Wrestling? Because you can make sure that your notifications are working and that you're subscribed to this channel, that way you always know. Anyway, with that being said, let's start the speculation. Naturally, if we're going to create some alternate reality where WWE only had one World Championship over the past several years, then logically, the most obvious thing to do is to start retconning around the time that that second belt was created. And in the case of the Universal Championship, that was first crowned in a match between Finn Balor and Seth Rollins at SummerSlam 2016. Finn Balor would win this match and become the inaugural Universal Champion. However, he would have to relinquish the title the next night on Raw. Now clearly, if WWE was to only have one world title, then the simplest thing to do would be to just not have this event take place. But before we completely commit to that, let's take a look at the other side of the equation. At this time, the WWE Championship was around the waist of Dean Ambrose, and he did indeed get to defend his title at that year's SummerSlam, although he did it against Dolph Ziggler, right in the middle of the card on the 6th match of the night, right between the Good Brothers taking on the New Day, and right before Nikki Bella, Natalya, and Alexa Bliss took on Becky Lynch, Naomi, and Carmella. Granted, the main event of that year's SummerSlam didn't go to Finn Balor and Seth Rollins either, but rather the top spot went to the match of Randy Orton and Brock Lesnar. The overall point here is that WWE wasn't really prioritizing the WWE title much at that time, as the Universal Championship really felt like the company's true focus, especially being on its flagship show back then. As I mentioned in a previous video, Dean Ambrose's title win just seemed obligatory, like by being a former member of the Shield, he was just supposed to get it on general principle or something. And furthermore, let's remember who Dean Ambrose won that title off of: Seth Rollins, when he cashed in his Money in the Bank on the same night that Rollins took the belt off of Roman Reigns. And so, with the WWE Universal title first being crowned just 2 months after Seth Rollins lost the belt to Dean, we can presume that they had plans to make the belt at this time. And therefore, I propose that Seth Rollins never loses the championship to Ambrose. But also, WWE still fully intends to capitalize on the dream match of the Sling Blade with Seth Rollins versus Finn Balor. And so, in this scenario, Seth and Balor still face off. Balor still goes over, but he still gets injured and has to relinquish the title the following night on Raw. However, this simple change does leave several objectives that need to be fulfilled. Number 1. Dean Ambrose is now still the only Shield member to have never won the WWE Championship, which he does have to do at some point in time. Secondly, by Dean not winning the WWE title, this will create a ripple effect, because remember who Dean would lose the title to: AJ Styles, who himself would go on to lose the championship to John Cena, giving him his record-tying 16th world title win. And third, Randy Orton himself would eventually win the WWE title, which has allegedly been reported to be something of a thank you from Vince McMahon to Randy for having to take the hard way shots from Brock at the exact SummerSlam that we were just talking about. If that is the case, then Randy's IOU title run still needs to happen. But there are also a few other things that we need to consider. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go back to the Universal title and see what was going on with the big red belt at the time. Because as I'm sure you remember, Kevin Owens would win the vacated title after Triple H turned on Seth Rollins to give Owens the belt. And from here, KO would develop his storyline with Chris Jericho, with Owens losing the title to Goldberg on March 5th, 2017 at Fastlane, and then wrestling Chris Jericho at WrestleMania for the United States title. Okay, so factoring all these conditions with Balor having to forfeit the belt, we can presume that WWE would take this opportunity to achieve a major objective. But with that being the case, which one is the most likely? Well, personally, I don't think Randy Orton's IOU or Dean Ambrose winning his first championship are major priorities, and I also don't think that it's mandatory for John Cena to tie the record right here and now. And in terms of Kevin Owens and Goldberg, well, the fact that KO and Jericho didn't even get to main event WrestleMania for a Universal title, even though the storyline was planned a long time ago, pretty much shows that they didn't have a lot of confidence in Kevin Owens as a main draw. So even though it sucks for him, I don't think he gets the belt under this timeline. But as for Goldberg, sure, he was already engaged in a program with Brock Lesnar ever since Survivor Series. But let's remember that their Universal title match at WrestleMania 33 was supposedly a last-minute addition after WWE lost confidence in the Jericho-Owens storyline. Alright, well, if none of those objectives are going to be met here, then what do I think is going to happen? Well, there is one other goal that I didn't mention, and it just so happens to serve the person who I think is going to win this vacated title, and that is AJ Styles. It has been noted by many that ever since the Phenomenal One debuted for WWE, two major things occurred. Number one, unlike his cohorts Samoa Joe and Nakamura, AJ would go right to the main roster and skip developmental. And secondly, Styles would win the WWE Championship within 1 year of his debut in the company. And some think that this title win was a heavy motivator in getting the face that runs the place to sign with WWE. Regardless to whether or not this is true, I still think WWE is going to repeat this. With them giving the title to first Balor and then Owens, it shows that they were looking to do something different, trying to break out of their normal routine. With that, AJ Styles wins the WWE Championship on an episode of Raw in August of 2016, and Kevin Owens doesn't get to win a world title. Although this does raise the question, who takes the belt off of AJ? Well, this is where I think those other objectives come into play. In real life, Kevin Owens would drop the Universal title to Bill Goldberg in February of 2017. Meanwhile, AJ Styles would drop his belt to John Cena at the Royal Rumble of that same year. And out of those two options, it's the latter that I think would happen, where I see history repeating itself and John Cena getting his record-tying 16th world title win against AJ at the Rumble. Now, I just want to remind everyone that this is what I think would actually happen. It's not necessarily what I want, and I definitely didn't want Cena to have a 16th world title run. Anyway, following this, Cena would have a very short world title reign as he would lose the belt to Bray Wyatt in the Elimination Chamber. And while I think that John Cena's 16th world title reign would conclude under similar conditions, I just don't see Bray winning a world title if there was only one to give anytime soon. But that's not to say that I don't think he won't at all. Anyway, for John Cena's abrupt 16th world title, he could drop the belt to Goldberg just like Owens did. However, I highly doubt the WWE would allow for WCW's Golden Boy to defeat their franchise. Granted, Goldberg has taken down some major WWE heavyweights, but then again, there are others that he definitely wasn't going to beat. And in my opinion, I say Cena goes into the latter category. Alright, so if not Goldberg, well, we could look at the other side of his feud to Brock Lesnar. Perhaps he's the one who could take John Cena's 16th world title. Well, I don't think it'll happen since Lesnar is the one who took John Cena's 15th world title belt, so it would seem a little redundant, don't you think? And as mentioned earlier, I'm working with the idea that Brock and Goldberg was an audible that was called after WWE lost faith in Owens and Jericho. And furthermore, Lesnar and Goldberg didn't even main event WrestleMania 33 to begin with. But you know who did? Roman Reigns. But while I do think that Roman Reigns is entering the title picture and the main event scene for WrestleMania 33, that doesn't mean that I think he's the person who's going to be taking the strap off of John Cena at the Elimination Chamber. Instead, I think we're going to check off another box here with a certain Mr. Money in the Bank. With Bray Wyatt winning the actual Elimination Chamber in 2017, it shows where WWE was at mentally around this WrestleMania season. Although you could say that the only reason why Bray won this belt was for the IOU championship that Randy Orton would win, as this was while Bray and Randy were in the middle of their Wyatt family storyline. Be that as it may, I don't think capping off Wyatt and Orton at Mania for the title is a must-have. I actually think they kinda rushed it just to give Randy his IOU. Now, with all this retconning, we are still stuck with two issues. Number one, what is going to be the main event for WrestleMania, and who is going to take the title off of John Cena? Well, I say it's Dean Ambrose, who still has a Money in the Bank that he never cashed in during this continuity. And with this taking place at Elimination Chamber, this leaves us with an interesting set of circumstances. If you remember, Dean was indeed a part of this match, but he was eliminated rather early. Now, in real life, this didn't do Dean any favors. However, in our timeline, we do have a pretty unique opportunity. After being eliminated, Dean Ambrose could choose this moment to reinsert himself back into the match by cashing in his Money in the Bank, and then come out victorious after getting 2 swipes at it. Plus, I do think that Ambrose is relatively on par with the actual Elimination Chamber winner Bray Wyatt. Okay, so now we have Dean with the belt, and we have Roman Reigns earmarked for the main event. So, is that it? Well, almost, but not quite. Oh, and also, by the way, Randy Orton doesn't win the Royal Rumble in this scenario. Who does? Well, it could be Roman, or it could be Seth Rollins, as I predict that if there were only one WWE World Championship, the main event of WrestleMania 33 would be a triple threat match between all 3 members of the Shield, which of course Roman would end up winning, but he wouldn't be holding onto the belt for very long. Back then, as much as they were bent on giving Reigns the belt, it doesn't mean that they were completely daft to the idea that he really can't sustain a long title reign. At least that is until he turned heel. And so, I see Reigns' reign ending at Backlash 2017, which, might I remind you, the WWE Championship did change hands at that pay-per-view, with Jinder Mahal getting the strap. Although, if there was only one WWE title, I highly doubt the modern-day Maharaja would ever get to wear it. But instead, I think it goes to the man that he took it off of, Randy Orton, as it's finally time to get his IOU. Okay, from here, this is our biggest crossroads, especially since we achieved all of those objectives that I mentioned earlier, as things could really go in any of many different directions at this point. But if I had to choose only one, then I'm deciding that this is where history begins to repeat itself, as I predict Randy Orton would lose the WWE Championship to Brock Lesnar. Randy's thank you title reign didn't last very long in real life, and I don't imagine it lasting very long here either, with Brock taking the title off of him at Extreme Rules 2017. The reason why I think this happened so soon is because of another objective that I didn't mention yet, and that's beating CM Punk's record of having the longest title run in the modern era. With Vince McMahon's well-known grudge against CM Punk, it's pretty clear that WWE would try to take this away from him as soon as they can. And just like in reality, Brock Lesnar was the one to do this, and I think he's going to do so again, with Brock holding on to the title all the way until SummerSlam 2018. Now granted, originally Brock did get a much earlier start than this, but either way, he still achieves the goal even if he starts at Extreme Rules. And following this, I think everything goes according to schedule for a while. Brock drops the belt to Roman, who unfortunately has to vacate the title, which is again re-won by Brock Lesnar. Oh, as is the case, AJ never has his year-long title run, meaning that the first time that the WWE Championship changes hands outside of North America isn't by Styles in England, but rather it's by Brock in Saudi Arabia. From here, I still think that Seth Rollins goes on to win that year's Royal Rumble, but now it will be his second Rumble win. And furthermore, just to catch everyone up, as a result of only having one championship, there are a lot of storylines that we're not going to be getting. We're not going to be getting AJ's second title run, we're not going to be getting the planet's champion, and we're also not going to get Kofi Mania. Because remember, Kofi only got the title as a result of how over he was after that gauntlet match on SmackDown, which was a #1 contendership match. But if there was only one WWE title, that match doesn't take place. Anyway, continuing on with Seth, I say that he still goes on to WrestleMania 35 to take the title off of Brock. However, he also still runs his mouth on Twitter and then becomes deemed not cool. As a result, Brock still cashes in his Money in the Bank and takes the belt off of him, only to give it right back in an attempt to try and rebound him, which doesn't work. This ultimately leads to Seth Rollins, just like in reality, losing the title to The Fiend. Now, the ongoing debate about whether or not The Fiend should have won the title and WWE's own shaky confidence at best in Bray notwithstanding, I still think this does happen. If the reports were true, Fox really wanted The Fiend as a major focal point of their newly acquired SmackDown show. And as ugly as it may be, that custom title made a lot of merchandise sales for WWE. And so, I still think that Bray gets the belt, even if it's only for a short while. But I don't predict that he would lose the belt to Goldberg like he did in the main timeline, but instead, while I do think he still loses it at Super Showdown, I think he loses it to, who else? Brock Lesnar. Now, on a side note, I do want to say that WWE's plans to have a spear versus spear match with Roman Reigns versus Bill Goldberg is still penciled in, even though it wouldn't take place. But I don't think the title being on the line is necessarily mandatory for this to happen. Now, with that being said, under these conditions, Braun Strowman never gets to win the WWE title either. Now, back on to Brock. If there was only one world championship, I do foresee that things would play out pretty much like they did. Drew McIntyre would go on to win the Royal Rumble and take the belt off of Brock at WrestleMania 36, but I don't think he would drop it to Randy Orton, even if he does end up just winning it right back. Instead, I think Drew McIntyre holds on to the WWE Championship all the way until Payback 2020, where he loses it to the Tribal Chief, Roman Reigns. And just like in real life, Roman Reigns is the champion even now. Well, there you go, what I think might have happened if WWE only had one world championship. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and make sure that you are subscribed to this channel. And also, if you could, leave a like. Anyway, thank you for watching and thank all of my awesome Patreon supporters. If you want a shout out, then sign up over on my Patreon page. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and as always, Dave knows.